They say most betrayals happen behind closed doors, but mine happened under fluorescent lights, over scrambled eggs and greasy bacon, in a half-empty Denny's just off I-40. I wasn't supposed to be there that night. I'd finished a last-minute inspection job across town, one of those late client calls where the heater's blowing cold and the grandkids are coming in from out of state. It was after 10:30 p.m. by the time I wrapped up, and all I wanted was something hot in my stomach and maybe 5 minutes to myself. The house would be dark, Jenna already asleep, and the dog snoring at the foot of the bed. Denny's was lit up like a roadside beacon, its neon sign flickering like it always did in the dead of winter, promising food and familiarity. I stepped inside, shook the frost off my shoulders, and asked the hostess to seat me in the back, like I always do when I'm dog-tired and not in the mood for conversation. Now, I need you to understand something before I go any further. I wasn't snooping. I didn't care who else was in the restaurant. I sat down, opened the menu even though I already knew I'd order the Grand Slam, and that's when I heard it, a laugh. Not just any laugh. A laugh I knew like the back of my hand, the kind of laugh that echoes in your garage after too many beers and a bad hand of poker. It was George, my best friend since 8th grade. George, who helped me rebuild my '76 Bronco, who coached my son's Little League team when I had to work weekends, who stood beside me at the altar 24 years ago when I said, I do to Jenna. And he was laughing loudly about something I didn't yet understand. Until he said her name. You ever seen Jenna when she's pissed off? She's a real firecracker in the kitchen, but in the bedroom? Man, that woman melts. My blood ran cold. His voice was low, like he knew he shouldn't be saying it, but cocky, like he knew he could get away with it. I sat there frozen, menu still in my hands, eyes staring down at the words buttermilk pancakes, while my ears picked up every filthy sentence. He kept going, kept laughing. The other guy, someone I didn't recognize, egged him on like it was a high school locker room, not a cheap diner with Formica tables and cracked ketchup bottles. I was at their house Sunday, George said, still chuckling. She was making muffins for Kurt while I was making her moan in the garage. My stomach turned so violently I thought I might vomit right there on the table. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. And in that exact moment, something inside me broke, not loudly, not with a shout or a slam of the fist, but quietly, like glass cracking under pressure. And right there, in that booth, over laminated menus and cold coffee, I decided I wasn't going to confront him. I was going to destroy them both. I think the part that eats at me the most is how blind I let myself be, not just to the obvious red flags waving right in front of my damn face, but to the smaller, quieter shifts that only make sense when you look back at them through the rearview mirror of betrayal. See, if you'd asked me 6 months ago how things were at home, I'd have told you they were fine, maybe a little stale, like reheated coffee, not great, but good enough to get by. Jenna had always been a bit sharp around the edges, opinionated to the point of exhausting, but I used to admire that fire in her. She was the kind of woman who could win an argument with a stare, the kind who ran our household like a damn battleship. I never minded. I liked order. But lately, that fire turned cold, not like it burned out, but like it had frozen over, and every time I reached out to her, I felt it through her words, her silence, her distance in our bed. The woman who once couldn't fall asleep unless her leg was tangled with mine had started sleeping on the very edge of the mattress, back turned, arms crossed, like she was bracing for impact or preparing for war. It started subtly, missed calls, vague texts, stories that didn't line up. She started working late, or so she said, but when I'd offer to swing by the office to bring her dinner, she'd either not answer or reply an hour later claiming she'd just gotten home. There was therapy too, supposedly for stress and some unresolved stuff from her childhood, and I supported that, wholeheartedly. I encouraged it, because I believed, stupidly, that healing was a good thing. But when I asked for the name of the counselor, not to check up on her, just to maybe write it down for insurance, she changed the subject like a pro, smooth and quick, like she'd rehearsed the dodge 100 times. Then there were the muffins. That might sound ridiculous, but stick with me. One Sunday morning, I walked into the kitchen and saw Jenna baking a batch of banana nut muffins, her grandmother's recipe, one she hadn't touched in years, not since our youngest left for college. I joked that it must be a special occasion, and she just smiled, too quickly, and said she felt like being domestic. But later that week, when I asked if there were any left, she acted like I'd imagined the whole thing. I didn't bake anything, she said. Maybe you're thinking of the donuts I brought home from work. Except I'd watched her slide those muffins into the oven with my own 2 eyes. I remember the smell. I remember the way she hummed while she mixed the batter. I remember the sudden warmth in a house that had started to feel cold. And now I know exactly who those muffins were for. And as for George? God, I should have known. The jokes were always there, little stabs wrapped in laughter. Comments about how lucky I was, about how tight Jenna kept herself, how feisty she must be in private. He said it like a friend would, too familiar to be just banter, but I laughed along because I didn't want to be the guy who couldn't take a joke. But the last time he came over, just a few days before Denny's, he made a comment while we were standing in the garage. Jenna had walked past the open door wearing her usual leggings and oversized sweater, and George leaned in and muttered that one should come with a warning label. I remember laughing, but there was something in the way he looked after her, something that lingered in his eyes too long to be friendly. And now, sitting here in hindsight, it's obvious. George wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was smirking while he did it, like he thought I'd never figure it out, like the joke wasn't just on me, but that I was the punchline. There's a strange thing that happens when your heart breaks hard enough, not like a clean crack, but a slow shatter, like glass spiderwebbing under pressure. Something cold starts to take over, not rage, not grief, but clarity. And in that clarity, I found a version of myself I didn't know existed. The old me, the trusting husband, the weekend griller, the fool who thought a tight schedule and paid bills made a marriage unshakable, he died somewhere between George's laughter and the way Jenna looked right through me at dinner the next night like I was wallpaper. I didn't throw her phone against the wall like I wanted to. No, I kissed her on the cheek, asked her how her therapy session went, and smiled while she told me it was exhausting but helpful. I nodded like a good husband does. What she didn't know, what George didn't know, was that I had already started making moves that would change everything. Because I wasn't going to blow this up in some emotional outburst. I was going to surgically dismantle them. That same night, while Jenna was in the shower humming some song that now makes my skin crawl, I stepped into the garage and installed a GPS tracker underneath her rear bumper, magnetic, discreet, battery-powered, and paired with an app that would ping me every time she left the house. Then I took her phone from the counter while steam fogged the mirror upstairs, and with my hands trembling only slightly, I cloned it to an old Samsung I had buried in the drawer next to our bed, a forgotten model from a trade-in that suddenly had new purpose. Within minutes, her messages, emails, and even app activity mirrored on my screen like a shadow life unfolding right in front of me. It was surreal, watching my wife's double existence download into my palm while she lathered her hair 2 floors above me, not knowing that the curtain had already started to fall on her performance. But that wasn't enough for me. I needed boots on the ground. So the next day, I found a private investigator, a guy named Landon with a calm voice and steel-trap memory, the kind of guy who charges by the hour but works like he's racing a stopwatch. I handed him a photo of Jenna, one of George too, and said only 6 words, "Tell me everything they're not saying." What followed was the longest week of my life. Every ping from the tracker, every notification from the clone app, every blurry photo Landon sent from a distance, they all added fuel to the quiet fire building inside me. Jenna wasn't just cheating. She was methodical, calculated, a master of misdirection. She'd leave for group therapy at 6:15 sharp, detour through the back roads, and arrive not at an office, but a 2-story ranch house near the edge of town, a rental property George just so happened to have inherited from his uncle. Inside, according to Landon's report, they weren't just meeting, they were playing house. She brought groceries. He lit candles. They cooked dinner together like a couple trying to remember what normal felt like. And then, when the lights dimmed and the blinds closed, I'd turn off my phone and stare at the ceiling, teeth grinding, fist clenched, telling myself the same thing over and over again. Not yet, Kurt. Not yet. Let them get comfortable. Let them think you're still the idiot sitting in the dark. And then you strike. There's something surreal about seeing a betrayal you've only imagined finally captured in still frames, like the moment a nightmare crystallizes into proof, and your heart doesn't shatter so much as it calcifies into something heavier, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. It was a Tuesday, just after 4 p.m., when I got the message from Landon. My PI short, clinical, devastating. Got what you need. Sending now. Prepare yourself. I opened the email like someone defusing a bomb, fingertip trembling over the screen, stomach clenched into a knot so tight it felt like it might never loosen. And there it was, high resolution, time-stamped, in full-color cruelty. Jenna, my wife of nearly a quarter century, stepping out of her silver SUV in a short beige trench coat and heels, her posture too relaxed, too confident for someone. Going to therapy. In the next photo, George, my best friend since middle school, was already waiting by the door of the rundown roadside motel off Route 29, the kind of place with hourly rates, sun-faded signage, and surveillance cameras that haven't worked since the Bush administration. He was wearing a ratty t-shirt and gym shorts, but more telling was the expression on his face, eager, smug, like a man showing up to collect something he believes is owed to him. The second set of images made my breath hitch in my throat. Landon had parked in the lot across from the room they entered, room 117, and, using a long lens, captured the moment the curtain slipped slightly open as the two of them laughed through the cracked window. Just long enough for one last shot that I'll never forget as long as I live. Jenna stood there in nothing but black lace lingerie, her arms wrapped around George's neck, his shirt discarded, their faces pressed too close to be anything but what it was: intimate, practiced, familiar. That photo didn't just confirm an affair, it confirmed a routine. These weren't two people swept up in a moment of bad judgment. This was deliberate, habitual, something they had done before and clearly planned to do again. And still, I didn't cry. I didn't punch a wall or scream into the void. No, the tears had dried up somewhere between suspicion and truth, and now, all I had left was resolve, cold, surgical, unstoppable resolve. I saved every image. I backed them up to a flash drive, emailed copies to a private folder, and then sat in silence, staring at my reflection in the black screen of my computer monitor like I was meeting a different version of myself for the first time. This wasn't the man who fixed gutters on weekends and barbecued for the neighbors every Memorial Day. This wasn't the man who brought flowers home for no reason or warmed Jenna's side of the bed when she said she was cold. This man was something else entirely, a shadow, a strategist, a patient predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Because now I had the one thing they thought I'd never get: proof. Undeniable, photographic proof that my wife and my so-called best friend were not only betraying me, but doing it with such arrogance that they didn't even bother to hide. But that's the thing about people who think they're smarter than you. They never expect the quiet man to be the one building the noose. I wasn't going to let emotions ruin the opportunity one had been gifted. No. I was going to burn their little world down, brick by careful brick, and I was going to make damn sure they watched it crumble from the inside. It was almost comical, in a sick kind of way, watching the woman I'd loved for nearly half my life sit across from me at our dinner table, swirling a fork through her untouched lasagna, giving an Oscar-worthy performance like she wasn't the lead actress in her own private horror film. I'd waited days for this moment, rehearsing every word, every facial expression, every pause in my head until it all played like muscle memory, and yet when I finally looked up from my plate and said, "Jenna, do you think we've been distant lately?" she didn't even flinch. Just a soft sigh, the kind people give when they're preparing to lie through their teeth without cracking a smile. Her head tilted to the side like I was a confused child she had to gently correct, and she said, honestly, "Kurt, I think you've been distant. I mean, you're either at work or in that damn garage, and when you're home, it's like you're not even here." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The power was in her delivery, calm, deflective, and just accusatory enough to shift the spotlight off herself. Classic projection, weaponized guilt, and if I hadn't already seen the motel photos with my own eyes, I might have believed her. But I had seen them. I'd seen everything: the motel, the trench coat, the way her fingers curled around George's shirt like she'd done it 1,000 times before. So when she leaned forward and added, "You've been acting paranoid lately, and honestly, it's exhausting," I didn't so much as blink. I just nodded, slow and deliberate, like her words were marinating in my mind when in truth, I'd already filed them away as more evidence. Gaslighting, plain and simple. A tactic as old as betrayal itself. She went on, of course, rattling off my supposed crimes like a prosecutor reading from a script she'd memorized long ago. I didn't listen anymore. I was emotionally unavailable. I used to be fun, but now I was just tired all the time. Never mind the late shifts, the endless responsibilities, the way I'd kept this house running while she played dress-up at roadside motels. She was rewriting history in real time, and doing it with the conviction of someone who had rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror and told herself the lie so many times it had calcified into truth. And the best part? I let her twist the knife with poetic finesse, all while I chewed my food like it was the most ordinary Tuesday in the world. She didn't know that I had her voice recorded from the Tracker app's remote mic, that every excuse she gave, every "I've been at therapy" or "I stayed late at work" line had already been disproven, time-stamped. and cataloged. She didn't know that Landon had followed her again just yesterday and snapped a picture of her sitting in George's lap outside a Taco Bell, like they were two teenagers without a conscience. She didn't know she was performing for a man who already had the script, the footage, and the ending in his back pocket. And as she stood up to clear the table, muttering something about how maybe we should talk to someone, I smiled to myself, not because I found it funny, but because she still thought she was directing the story. What she didn't realize was that I was already in the editing room, cutting her lines and planning the finale, one she would never forget. There is a silence in a lawyer's office that is different from the silence in any other room, not the reverent silence of a chapel or the clinical silence of a hospital, but something heavier, like a thick pause before a storm, the kind of silence that suggests that life is about to change and the bell is not going to ring. I remember walking into that office, smelling leather and old carpet glue in the air, and sitting down across from a divorce lawyer named Rita Colson, about 50 years old, steel gray hair, eyes like a hawk who had seen everything and more. I handed her a folder with photos, text messages, voice recordings, and time-stamped locations, and let the paper speak for itself. She flipped through it all without blinking, then looked up and said, "You have come to the right place. Do you want scorched earth, or something more subtle?" I smiled, not because I felt like a winner, but because I already knew the answer. "I want them to think they are safe," I told her. "And then I want to take everything." And so it began, quiet as snowfall, precise as clockwork. Rita drafted the divorce petition but didn't file it yet. Instead, she advised we first secure all marital assets, freeze the joint accounts, transfer the house deed into a trust with my name on it, lock down retirement funds before Jenna could start siphoning them out under the radar. I opened a new account under my business name and redirected every automatic deposit I had, down to the last cent. I even cashed out the bonds my grandmother left me, the ones Jenna had no idea existed, and tucked them somewhere safe. By the time she noticed anything off financially, I'd already placed the final piece of this stage, a decoy. You see, our 24th wedding anniversary was approaching, a milestone most couples celebrate with dinner, dancing, maybe a weekend getaway. I celebrated with surveillance. I bought her a necklace, faux pearls, high-end knockoff, convincing enough to pass for a few $1,000s if you didn't look too closely. I wrapped it in a velvet box, scribbled a love note that made me want to throw up writing it, and planned the evening with the kind of detail you'd expect from a man proposing, not divorcing. That night, I watched her from across the restaurant table, candles flickering between us, her face glowing with the kind of satisfaction that made me want to slap the smugness off it. She opened the box, gasped like she hadn't rehearsed the sound a dozen times before, and immediately reached for her phone, not to thank me, of course, but to text him. I watched the screen light up in her lap, her lips curling into a smile while she typed under the table like a teenager in love. She looked up and said, "You still know how to surprise me." And I raised my glass and smiled back, knowing the real surprise hadn't even begun yet. Because I wasn't just recording her reaction on my phone camera hidden in my coat pocket. I had also synced her phone clone to the backup drive in my truck. Her entire conversation with George, timestamped during our anniversary dinner, would soon be printed and attached to the divorce filing, as evidence of infidelity on the day she celebrated being my wife. If there's anything I've learned about betrayal, it's that the wound doesn't sting the most when it's inflicted. It burns hottest when the liar is still smiling at you, when everyone around them still sees the mask and not the rot behind it. I waited until the following Saturday, when Jenna's parents were in town for her father's birthday. I told her I wanted to host a small dinner, keep it intimate, just her mom, dad, her younger sister Madison, and a few close friends from our side of the neighborhood. I told her George should come, too, for old time's sake. Of course she did. Why wouldn't she? She thought I was still the fool baking lasagna while she was booking motel rooms. The dinner was flawless, at least on the surface. The table was set with candles and cloth napkins, her mother complimented the wine, and Jenna played the role of doting wife like she was auditioning for a Lifetime movie. George sat to my left, cocky, relaxed, sipping bourbon with that crooked grin I once trusted with my life. Jenna laughed a little too hard at his jokes, placed her hand on his arm a little too naturally. Her father gave a toast, the kind of heartfelt ramble only fathers can get away with, about family and commitment and growing old with the one who always stands by you. That line nearly broke me, but I held the poker face. I waited until the last bite of dessert had been scraped from the plates, until everyone was full, content, settled into the warmth of wine and familiarity. And then I stood up and said, "Before we wrap up tonight, I want to share something, a little video I put together to celebrate our love and all we've built together." Jenna beamed. George raised his glass. And I walked over to the TV, plugged in a flash drive, and hit play. The first clip was surveillance footage, grainy, time-stamped, irrefutable. Jenna stepping out of her car in that same beige trench coat. George opening the motel door. Their lips meeting like this was their 50th time, not their first. Her mother gasped before she even understood what she was seeing. Her father dropped his fork. Then came the texts, screenshots pulled from her phone, blowing up one after the other on the screen like gunfire. "Can't wait to see you again. He has no clue. You give me what he never could." The room was dead silent, except for the clicking of the slideshow. Jenna's smile disappeared, her eyes darting toward me like she couldn't believe what was happening, as if I were the traitor, as if I had crossed the line. George stood up like he might say something, but then Madison, sweet, naive Madison, looked straight at him and said, "You disgust me." That's when George turned and bolted, grabbing his coat, face red, silence chasing him out the front door like a ghost. Jenna tried to speak, but her father was already standing, shaking his head, his voice trembling with a rage I'd never seen in that gentle old man. "Don't. Just don't." The mask had been ripped off, and I made damn sure there was an audience to see it happen. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was sad, or even angry anymore, but because my mind was a war room, mapping out every final move with precision so sharp it felt like a second skin. By sunrise, I had already packed 2 suitcases, loaded them into my truck, and walked through that house, my house, one last time like I was taking inventory before demolition. Every picture frame, every dish in the sink, every coffee stain on the counter from 24 years of mornings, all of it meant nothing now. Jenna hadn't just betrayed me, she'd insulted my intelligence, gambled my loyalty like it was a cheap chip in her secret little game, and worst of all, she thought she'd win. But she didn't see the real twist coming, that while she was busy playing house with George in budget motels and texting him under the dinner table, I'd been turning every screw behind the scenes. So I left the keys on the table, not in some dramatic goodbye, but because the locks had already been changed, and soon, she wouldn't own a damn thing behind that door. By 11:15 a.m., I was standing in the reception area of the private school where Jenna worked as an academic counselor, prim, polished, and fake as hell, smiling politely while the office assistant buzzed her phone. She came out in a blazer and pencil skirt, still playing the role of the composed, accomplished woman she had built her entire image around. But the second she saw me standing there, holding a manila envelope in one hand and a bouquet of cheap gas station flowers in the other, her face flickered, not with guilt, not with shame, but with pure, unfiltered panic. I handed her the bouquet first, just for the theatrics, and then passed the envelope directly into her hand. "You've been served," I said loud enough for her coworkers within earshot to hear. The color drained from her face. I didn't wait for a response. I turned around and walked out the door, listening as the front desk assistant awkwardly asked, "Was that your husband?" like she was witnessing the first crack in a porcelain doll. She had no idea. Jenna had spent years curating her image, but in less than 30 seconds, I'd shattered it, publicly, professionally, permanently. And George? He didn't fare much better. The idiot didn't realize until Monday morning that his phone had stopped ringing. No oil changes, no brake jobs, no diagnostics. See, I wasn't just his friend. I was his entire client base. I owned 4 commercial vans, 3 personal vehicles, and a web of referrals that kept his small-time garage breathing. The moment I pulled all my business and sent word to everyone I knew, George's garage became a tomb. Within days, the only people visiting were collection agencies and one very angry woman who turned out to be his landlord. As for Jenna, she lost the house when the trust kicked in, she had no legal claim after the paperwork my lawyer pre-filed, and the car she loved driving? Leased in my name, insurance under mine, and now repossessed. The joint accounts were frozen, the savings split, except I'd quietly moved mine months ago. All that was left for her was a hollow house, a shattered reputation, and a man who couldn't even keep his shop open. They thought they were untouchable. They thought I'd break down. But I didn't. I burned it all down instead, with receipts, with witnesses, and with a smile on my face.